Hot takes are like Pringles, you can't just have one, so let's pop a few of them and react to them. I asked for your hottest, spiciest takes about Final Fantasy XIV. You provided, and now it's time to react to them. Let's get right on into this, shall we? Hello everyone, I am Jmulls, and we're going to start off with a double feature. First up, we have at BioCajun86, who says, I hate that my glam choices are role locked. If I want my character to just have a certain glam they wear regardless of role, or if I see a piece of fending or aiming gear that I'd like to glam while casting, I think we should have that level of player autonomy. Square Enix gets at least $180 from every player per year. Let us decide how we look when we play. And then in a similar vein, we have at 38 Spoonman, who says, I don't know how much of a hot take it is, but I wish glamour wasn't limited to role. I play mostly DPS, but I like the Armored Knight style sets that tanks get, and I just wish you could glam what you want. I'm in kind of two minds about this, right? Because I am someone who started to dabble into tanks a while back because the glamour sets just appealed to me far more than the other roles. I do like that heavily armored knight aesthetic, which is just something that you largely don't get from anything else outside of Dragoon occasionally. And the aesthetics of the DPS jobs don't really fill that role for me. As someone who likes to use a big sword or just a big weapon overall, I'm kinda stuck with tank. So there is a part of me that's like, yeah, you know what? It would be nice to just be able to glam whatever I want, regardless of role and regardless of job restriction. But there's also a part of me that's like, there is a certain layer of flavor that your look is somewhat dependent upon the role you play. So there's a part of me that's worried that if they do go in this direction, you could possibly lose something in regards to the overall feel of the game. And then there's another part of my brain that goes, you are wildly overthinking it, and that the pros wildly outweigh the cons. I think, from my perspective at least, I would always want them to design sets based on the inherent aesthetic of a job. But if they do go in the direction where, yeah, we're going to design new sets based on role, and for each expansion based on your job, we're going to continue to do that. But we'll just let you mix and match whatever you want. I think I wouldn't be opposed to something along those lines. Because there is a part of my brain that does get excited for whatever new Dark Knight set they managed to craft up. I'm always a fan of them. And the one we got in Dawntrail was really cool, I love it. And as someone who generally dislikes the warrior sets we get, I wouldn't mind being able to just have the Dark Knight aesthetic with the giant axe. Maybe that's just a me thing, but I wouldn't mind seeing it. Next up, we have at Ruka9700, who says, my hot take is game is fine, y'all just babies. And you know what? It's weirdly perfectly timed for the video that I did yesterday, detailing some data that Final Fantasy XIV's active players, at least as of end of May-ish, were declining drastically with Dawntrail. However, there is a deeper analysis or just discussion that we can have here. And that is a point quite a few people brought up in that video that, hey, those big numbers that we saw during Shadowbringers and Endwalker, it's possible you can contribute a lot of those numbers to the overall lockdown effect. A lot of games saw massive spikes in numbers when people were just locked inside with nothing else to do but play video games. Heck, we saw one of World of Warcraft's, heck, I'd argue the worst, expansion, have really good numbers at the beginning because everyone just wanted to play something. So it's not unreasonable to believe that now that's largely in the past, those numbers are going to go down. And if that is the entire reason, I don't think it is, but if that is the entire reason, yeah, the game is probably still fine. Heck, I even think as of right now, in terms of overall health for the game isn't in danger of failing or anything like that. I've talked about this a lot recently, and when it comes to critiquing a game like Final Fantasy XIV, it's really hard to talk in absolutes, because people at the end of it all just like different things. There's going to be people that like the Occult Crescent, and there's going to be people that dislike the Occult Crescent. There's going to be people that like cosmic exploration, and there's going to be people that dislike cosmic exploration. There's going to be people that like the story of Dawntrail, and there's going to be people that dislike the story of Dawntrail. However, I've also talked about how those splits aren't always even, right? It's not always just a 50-50 split. Sometimes things are just wildly more popular or unpopular than other things, and sometimes things that were once popular can become unpopular if nothing really changes and it just gets kind of old and stale for a lot of people. And while I think currently the game is not in the best of places, I don't think the content is up to par, and I don't think Final Fantasy XIV is reaching its full potential, I am not going to sit here and talk about how the game is going to die and that Square Enix is an absolute failure. Fire everyone. I'm not going to be the guy that says any of that because I don't believe it. I think the game is in a bit of a rough patch, but it has a lot of areas that it can improve on to make the game better. Now, I don't see the game making a lot of these massive changes that I think the overall philosophy the game has is going to change in the patches of Dawntrail. I don't believe that at all. I think our best bet to see those giant overarching changes is with the next expansion, and if they take the right feedback to heart, or if we just end up getting more of the same. There's a lot of people that love to talk in extremes when it comes to the internet discussions, right? Especially when it comes to like online games and live service style games. With like any dip in overall numbers, people love to say the game is dead, abandon ship, fire everyone. Yeah, sure, the game isn't as popular as it was in Shadowbringers and Endwalker. But if you still enjoy the game, then it's not like they're going to shut off the servers tomorrow or anything like that. And I think a lot of people would be willing to come back to Final Fantasy XIV if things do improve. Speaking of something that's been improving, let's talk story. Our next take is courtesy of @Osiris Abrazax, who says, "Here's my hot take. The post 7.0 MSQ is actually freaking good stuff. It's what I actually wanted for Sphene's character, where she was actually a victim of the plot and not pushing the plot. It's leaning back on the Warrior of Light as Sphene is engaging with us and not freaking Wook Lamont." I entirely agree. I wasn't that big of a fan of the story in 7.0. There were moments and things and elements that I did like, mainly when it comes to Alexandria and Solution 9 and all that stuff. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but there were elements of that story that I did like and that I found interesting. 7.1 was an overall good step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough, and there were still massive lingering storytelling issues held over from Dawntrail 7.0. And then 7.2 came out, and it pulled me back in. The story was great. I loved the writing. I loved the dialogue. I loved the pacing. I loved the characterization of Sphene. I love the Warrior of Light feeling like an important character again. I think overall, if there's one element above all else in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail that they've already showed to me that they're willing to improve, they're willing to take player feedback into account, the right player feedback, to make the experience more engaging and enjoyable and more in line with what I at least personally want to see out of the game, it was the story. I am not exaggerating when I say, for me, the jump in storytelling quality from 7.0 to 7.1 to 7.2 was a jump I didn't expect to see until either late in the patch cycle or with 8.0, because it was such a drastic jump from 0.0 and 0.1 to 0.2. Maybe not everyone agrees with me on that, but to me at least, I'm fully looking forward to what's going to happen in the 0.3 storyline. I'm somewhat interested in Calyx. I am absolutely on board with the Sphene train that they're doing right now, and I'm fascinated by where this story is going to go in the future. I'm on board. Next up, we have @Bossy, who says, "Time for another of Lady Bossy's spicy takes. Let Alphino and Alize grow up already. Those two have been kids for years now and deserve a growth spurt after all the stuff they've been through. It could even lead to some hilarity where the other Scions see them as grown-ups and wonder who they are. Maybe it would involve a time skip, but I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to this, though I can understand Square Enix worry and concern there, that essentially the mascots for the game, alongside Y'shtola, changing their image so drastically like that. I can understand the concern because it's really, really, really hard to go back without making it feel forced. And I can understand Square Enix's concern, where it's like, if we do pull this trigger and people don't like it, what do we do then? However, I think that's a fear and a concern that Square Enix has had in a lot of their overall design philosophy when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, that I think they need to kind of move away from and be willing to go outside their comfort zone, to go outside the confines of what has come before and be willing to try new things. That is a direction that I think Final Fantasy XIV needs to go in content to some degree. You don't want to just throw away everything and just do whatever wild, wacky idea you come up with this week. But I think Final Fantasy XIV far too often can feel a bit too conservative and a bit too playing their cards close to their chest when it comes to a lot of overall design philosophy and decision making. They need to be willing to step outside their comfort zone sometimes, and for characters like Alphinaud and Alisaie, where we've had their stories, right? The Hydaelyn Zodiac arc is over with. And like, as characters, they were just kind of there in Dawntrail. Maybe a big shakeup for those characters if you still want them around instead of introducing new characters. A big character shakeup, like just having them grow up a bit, could potentially go a long way in terms of kickstarting whatever new story you want to tell with them. I don't think it's mandatory or anything like that, but if they do go in that direction, I'd be interested to see what kind of story they have. I don't think they should just do change for the sake of change. It needs to be meaningful and have a purpose behind it. And if they do end up getting that purpose, I'd be willing to see what it is. Next up, for the final take of the video, we have at NoReQ1W, who says, "My biggest issue with the devs is that they won't commit to either side. Sometimes they'll make engaging and difficult content, but then the casuals whine, yet stay subbed anyways. Then they'll make it turbo brain dead and then everyone gets bored and unsubs. They need to stop listening to the few complaining people who are bad at video games and just listen to their core MMO demographic so that the game can stay alive." Who's ready for a nuanced discussion? I do somewhat understand where this position is coming from, because I think content that is necessarily designed for a more quote-unquote casual audience doesn't have enough engaging content to make it remotely fun, in my opinion. But there are elements that I think Final Fantasy XIV does from time to time that I quite like. Them experimenting with a lot of those scenarios that we had in Endwalker, like the Thancred ones, remember those? This is Thancred. Yeah, maybe they weren't executed the best in Endwalker. Maybe some were better than others, but I like the idea of trying to give the player more interesting and engaging gameplay to break up the flow of just cutscene simulator that Final Fantasy XIV can feel at times. Because at the end of it all, I do believe Final Fantasy XIV is a video game. You shouldn't necessarily hide away from that fact, even when it comes to telling a story. Being cutscene heavy is fine, it's part of the charm of Final Fantasy XIV, but when most of the gameplay in the story boils down to just go and kill this one mob that kind of feels like a glorified training dummy, I think we're severely missing out on the full potential of the storytelling experience Final Fantasy XIV could have. Where do I think they shine? When they have you do dungeons, when they have you do trials. Heck, I really enjoy the critical engagements found in the Occult Crescent. It's just when you do anything many times over, it'll get a bit stale, right? You can have the most delicious meal of your life, but if it's the only thing you ever end up eating, eventually you'll get sick of it. And one of the things I really liked about Dawntrail, funnily enough, was those little 1v1 fights like we had at the end of Endwalker throughout Dawntrail, where we fought Bakul Jaja and Galul Jaja, those kinds of scenarios. Those were cool. I want more stuff like that. Things that aren't necessarily all that difficult, but at least make me feel as if I have to pay attention to some degree. It's a game, it should be engaging, it should be fun. And I think when Square Enix listens to people that are unable to do quite a few of these sections too much, it erodes the potential for interesting gameplay that the bulk of the experience of Final Fantasy XIV could have. I don't think if you want an engaging gameplay experience, you should be forced into Savage Raiding or Extreme Trials or Ultimate Raiding or anything like that. The game itself should be fun and engaging. And I talked about this before, I think one of Dawntrail's greatest strengths, funnily enough, is its fight design. Like, even the ones that are relatively easier are pretty cool. Like, the dungeons in Dawntrail, yeah, you still have that issue with the overall layout of them being like cookie cutter and all that, but the fights are pretty cool in there. It's just, I think we need that type of stuff more often, and I would love to see them introduce more varied gameplay sections, more akin to what we had in Endwalker than what we had in Dawntrail. Remember that one scene in Kozama Uka where we had to like track down Bakul Jaja and we had to use like stealth tactics? To me, that's a pale imitation of the Thancred sections from Endwalker. and I think it was course correcting too much in the wrong direction. I mean, Yoshi P and Square Enix talked about it before leading up to Dawntrail's release, how, well, when it comes to a lot of their design, and I think they were talking mainly about fight design when it comes to this, but I think it extends to a lot of elements of the game. A lot of the times they end up thinking, how could we not irritate people or frustrate people? Which when you're working on a game that is as big as Final Fantasy XIV, that is very understandable, I think. But I think when you only think like that, the game can become a bit too sanitized, a bit too smooth without enough rough edges to give it the texture and the personality the game kind of needs, in my opinion, to really stand out and be interesting. It's like, for me at least, when it comes to the Occult Crescent, difficulty isn't my problem. It is when it comes to fates, those suck. But the actual critical encounters there, I really like them. When it comes to the boss design in dungeons, I really like them. When it comes to the boss design in the raids, I really like them. When we got to fight Gulul Jaja in the Dawntrail MSQ, I really like those. It's just, I need more of that stuff throughout the main story. I need more gameplay sections that make me feel engaged when I'm playing the game. I don't think content needs to be overly difficult and overly punishing, because those are two different things in my opinion as well. The content itself needs to find a way to be engaging, and that can happen through different ways and different means. But so long as it gets to being engaging in its own unique way, I think that does have value. And I think that's one of Dawntrail's weirdest strengths, because it is there in my opinion. It's just sometimes it can be too few and far between. Mainly when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the story, the MSQ. I don't think the overall difficulty is the issue. I think it's the type of content available and the frequency that we get it. That, for me at least, is the bigger issue right now. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with your hot takes about, let's get a bit more specific here, 7.3. We had the first live letter. How do you think it's going to go? How are you feeling about it? What's getting you excited? What's getting you a bit disappointed? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe. Have a great day. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.